It's one of those things you see all the time, but maybe don't really think about. Why is the price of oil always in US dollars, no matter where you are? Or why do news channels obsess over its value? Well, today, we're going to dive deep into the incredible, almost invisible power of the US dollar and figure out how it became the literal backbone of the entire global economy.
I mean, it's a wild question when you stop to think about it, right? How did one country's money become the world's money? And let me tell you, this was no accident. It wasn't inevitable. The dollar's dominance is a fascinating story of power, of strategy, and a few key moments in history that basically locked it into place. So let's unpack exactly how it all went down.
Okay, to really get a picture of just how massive this is, look at this. This shows what the world's central banks, the big national banks, are holding in their savings accounts, their reserves. The US dollar makes up a staggering 60% of all of it. Just for comparison, the euro is a distant second at 20%, and everybody else, barely on the chart. This isn't just a lead, folks. This is total command of the field.
So the big question is, how on earth did we get to this point? How did one currency get to be so important? Well, it didn't happen overnight. It was a journey, really, built piece by piece over the last century or so. Let's walk through the key moments that made it happen. All right, so the story really kicks off in 1944. World War II is ending, and global leaders get together for what's called the Bretton Woods Agreement. They decide to peg all their currencies to the US dollar, which itself was pegged to gold. Bam! The dollar is now the anchor for the entire global system. Then you fast forward to 1971. President Nixon makes a huge move and cuts the dollar's link to gold. But by then the world was so used to the dollar, so dependent on it, that its central role just stuck. And then came the real masterstroke in the mid-70s, the petrodollar system. This was the deal where oil, the most important commodity on the planet, would be priced only in dollars. This created a permanent, global, unending demand for greenbacks. Okay, so that's the history. That's how the dollar got to the top of the mountain. But why does it stay there? Why hasn't something else taken over? Well, the answer comes down to a few powerful, self-reinforcing pillars that are holding the whole thing up today. But before we get to those pillars, let's just make sure we're on the same page with one key term: reserve currency. What is that? Honestly, the simplest way to think of it is as the savings account for an entire country. It's the currency they trust to hold their wealth and to do their biggest international deals. And let me tell you, being the #1 reserve currency, that is the ultimate prize in global finance. So the dollar's reign today really rests on three core pillars. First, it's seen as the world's safest asset. Second, it's the standard for pricing all the big stuff. And third, it's backed by the deepest, most accessible financial markets on the planet. Let's break each one of those down. So pillar number 1, safety. And this is where it gets kind of weird, a little paradoxical, right? When there's a big global crisis, even if the crisis starts in the US, you'd think people would run away from the dollar. But they do the exact opposite. Everybody rushes to the dollar. They pour their money into US Treasury bonds because they're seen as the safest possible place to park cash. So bizarrely, global chaos often just makes the dollar even stronger. Pillar number 2, it's the price of everything that matters. We talked about oil, but it's also gold, copper, wheat. All the major commodities are priced in dollars. So what does that mean? It means if your country wants to buy or sell these essential goods, you need dollars to do the deal. Period. This creates this constant structural 24/7 demand for the currency from every corner of the globe. And finally, pillar number 3, the US just has the deepest pockets. Think of it this way. If you drop a huge boulder into a small pond, it makes a massive splash, right? It disrupts everything. Now try dropping that same boulder into the Pacific Ocean. You'd barely see a ripple. Well, the US financial market is the ocean. It's so enormous and so liquid, you can move billions of dollars around without causing a panic. That makes it the only practical platform for massive global finance. When you put all this together, you get what a French finance minister once famously called an exorbitant privilege. It's a great phrase, but what's it mean in practice? Well, it means the US can essentially buy more from the world than it sells, and then pay for it just by creating more dollars, money that the rest of the world is happy to take and hold. For any other country on Earth, that would be a recipe for total economic collapse. For the US, it's just business as usual. So this all leads to the big question. Is this going to last forever? I mean, nothing does, right? People have been talking about potential challengers to the dollar's throne for years. So let's take a quick look at who's actually in the running. The two names you always hear are the euro and China's yuan. But here's the thing. They each face some pretty big hurdles.
The euro is backed by a whole committee of different countries, not one single government, and that can create political questions. The yuan, on the other hand, comes from China, a country with really strict controls on money, which makes big global investors nervous. You see, for a new currency to take over, it's not enough for the dollar to look a little weak. The alternative has to look overwhelmingly strong, stable, and ready to go. And we're just not there yet.
And that leaves us with one last big thought. Having one currency at the center of everything does provide a certain kind of stability. It's predictable, but it also gives one single nation an incredible amount of power and privilege. So the ultimate question isn't just if the dollar's reign will end, but whether a system built around any one dominant currency is a good thing for the world, a feature, or if it's actually a bug, something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this one.